A warship descended through the clouds, its shadow stretching across the jungle canopy like a predator hunting prey. It hovered for a moment, then released a squadron of armored drop pods. The pods struck the ground with seismic force, tearing into the earth and sending shockwaves rippling through the trees. From them emerged soldiers clad in sleek exosuits, their visors scanning the terrain, weapons primed. The Galactic Empire had come to claim another world. This planet was primitive. No orbital stations, no energy shields, not even proper cities. Just scattered settlements, clinging to the land like moss on stone. The locals were barely past combustion engines. Their vehicles wheeled and roared, their weapons spat fire and lead. They weren't even using plasma or rail technology. Imperial scouts had laughed when they first encountered resistance. One soldier recorded footage of a man firing what looked like a relic from an ancient museum, a rotating barrel cannon that churned out bullets in relentless bursts. He had mocked it, calling it a spinning toy. His commander agreed, dismissing the weapon as obsolete. It fired physical projectiles. It jammed. It needed constant reloading. It was slow, inaccurate, and utterly outclassed by modern weaponry. The scout teams hadn't even bothered to report it as a serious threat. Now, the invasion had begun in earnest. Imperial forces moved forward, sweeping through the jungle with disciplined precision. Drones scouted ahead, scanning for movement. Infantry formed up, advancing in tight formation. No one expected a real fight. This was just another conquest, another footnote in the Empire's expansion. Then the sound came. It started low, like distant thunder rolling over the hills. Then it grew louder, faster, until it became a continuous roar, an unrelenting cacophony of metal death. Trees exploded in sprays of bark and blood. Soldiers screamed as rounds tore through armor and flesh alike. Entire squads vanished in seconds, shredded by fire so intense it defied logic. They didn't have time to react. The Gatling gun had arrived. From the jungle shadows, the humans opened up. Dozens of barrels spun in perfect unison, spitting hundreds of rounds per second. The noise was deafening, the impact catastrophic. Imperial armor cracked under the barrage. Shields overloaded instantly. Bodies were reduced to mangled ruins before they hit the ground. Survivors scrambled for cover, but there was none. The forest was too dense to maneuver, too chaotic to retreat. The bullets came from everywhere, above, below, behind the trees. It was like being hunted by ghosts armed with infernal machines. One soldier managed to activate his suit's emergency beacon before a round tore through his chest. His last transmission showed only chaos. Blurred figures in the smoke, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness, and the endless scream of spinning death. Back at command, analysts reviewed the footage. At first, they thought it was a malfunction, some glitch in the recording. But the data was real. Casualty reports flooded in. Entire platoons wiped out in minutes. Recon drones showed fields littered with corpses, some missing limbs. Others turned into pulp. Commanders dismissed it at first. Primitive tech, they said. They got lucky. But the survivors knew better. They described something terrifying. A weapon that never stopped firing. That didn't care about range or cover. That chewed through anything in its path. It wasn't advanced. It was brutal, relentless, efficient, and worst of all, it worked. More troops were deployed. This time, they brought heavier armor, more firepower, aerial support. They would crush the resistance once and for all. The humans couldn't possibly stand against such overwhelming force. But when the next wave entered the jungle, the same thing happened. Again, and again, and again. The Gatling gun wasn't just a weapon. It was a statement. We are here. We will fight. And we will win. The Empire had underestimated them. Badly. By now, word had spread among the ranks. Soldiers whispered about the spinning death. Some refused to enter the jungle without additional shielding. Others began questioning orders. Morale dipped. Command tried to suppress the reports, but the truth was undeniable. Casualties were rising, and the enemy was barely taking any losses. Back on the capital ship, high-ranking officers debated their next move. Some argued for orbital bombardment. wipe the entire region from space, end the conflict in one devastating strike. Others hesitated, because if they did that, they'd be admitting defeat. Instead, they chose escalation. More troops, more tanks, more air support. They would show these primitives what real warfare looked like. But as the Empire prepared its next assault, the humans were already moving. They had learned from every battle. They adapted quickly, set traps, reinforced positions, improved their weapons. They scavenged wreckage for parts, built new fortifications, coordinated ambushes with military precision. And they waited because they knew the Empire wouldn't stop coming. Not until they were forced to. The next attack came at dawn. Massive hover tanks rolled into the jungle, flanked by mechanized infantry. Fighters soared overhead, scanning for targets. Drones buzzed like insects, feeding data back to command. The humans responded with fire. Gatling guns roared from hidden emplacements, cutting down the tanks before they could deploy. Explosives detonated beneath the tracks, flipping vehicles into the air. Snipers picked off pilots mid-flight. The jungle became a graveyard of twisted metal and scorched earth. The Empire's forces faltered. For the first time in centuries, they faced an enemy that refused to fall. An enemy that fought not with superior tech, but with strategy, determination, and sheer human willpower. And the most terrifying part? They were winning. The battlefield was littered with dead Imperials. The air reeked of burning fuel and blood. Survivors crawled to the mud, begging for extraction. Command watched in horror as the feed cut out, replaced by static. Silence. Then a single message appeared on every screen. You thought we were weak. You were wrong. High Command sat in stunned silence. The war had changed, and the Empire had just met an enemy it had never accounted for. Humans, fighting back. Hard. The jungle was silent now, but not the kind of silence that meant peace. It was a silence after a storm, a hush left in the wake of destruction. Imperial forces regrouped at the edge of the battlefield. The wreckage of their machines smoked in the morning light. Bodies strewn across the mud like broken toys. Medics struggled to reach the wounded, only to be cut down by distant gunfire. Every step forward was met with resistance. Every retreat was lined with corpses. Command watched from orbit as casualty reports flooded in. Entire squads were missing. Drones failed to return. Recon footage showed only carnage. Vehicles flipped onto their sides, armor melted by explosives, soldiers torn apart by relentless fire. They had underestimated the enemy, not just once, but repeatedly. Now they faced a choice: retreat and accept failure, or commit everything they had left. They chose the latter. A new wave of drop pods streaked through the sky, larger than before. These carried elite shock troops, units trained for high-risk combat, equipped with the latest exo-armor designed to withstand heavy gunfire. Their visors pulsed with targeting data as they landed, boots crunching into blood-soaked earth. Orders were clear: push deeper into the jungle, locate the human stronghold and destroy it. They moved fast. Squadrons split into smaller units, avoiding large formations that could be targeted easily. They used terrain cover, flanking maneuvers, drone scouts ahead of them. Every soldier knew the risk, but morale was steady. They were professionals, veterans. This was just another insurgency, one more problem to solve. Then the gunfire started again. It wasn't like before. This time, the humans fought smarter. Traps lined the jungle floor, invisible wires triggering bursts of fire from hidden positions. Smoke canisters exploded, blinding drones mid-flight. Tripwires set off mines that tore through legs and torsos alike. One squad reached what looked like an abandoned campsite. A soldier stepped forward, scanning the area. He signaled his team to advance. Then the ground collapsed beneath them. Trenches opened up like hungry mouths, swallowing men whole. From below, shadows moved. Human figures emerged, weapons raised. Gatling guns roared up close, tearing through armor at point-blank range. The survivors barely had time to scream before it was over. Command lost contact with that unit within minutes. Elsewhere, another group pushed forward cautiously, using sonic pings to detect movement underground. They found tunnels, Hidden passages dug deep into the earth, reinforced with scavenged metal plating. Inside, they found caches of ammunition, medical supplies, even crude but effective communication hubs. Someone had planned this. Someone had coordinated every ambush, every trap, every strike. This wasn't just a resistance force. It was an army, and they were ready. Back at base, officers argued over strategy. Some demanded orbital bombardment. Others insisted on sending in more infantry. Analysts pored over capture footage, trying to find patterns in the human tactics. They noticed something chilling. The humans weren't just fighting, they were adapting. Every battle changed their approach. If one ambush failed, they modified their positions. If a weapon jammed, they improved its design. They learned faster than expected, studied Imperial movements, anticipated assaults before they happened. Their command structure was decentralized. No central HQ, no obvious leaders. Just small cells acting independently, yet all working toward the same goal. It was chaos, and it was working. Imperial morale began to crack. Soldiers whispered about ghosts in the trees, about enemies who never slept, about weapons that never stopped firing. Command dismissed these stories as fear-induced hallucinations, but the truth was undeniable. Troop losses were unsustainable. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was losing, not because the humans had superior technology, because they fought with something the Empire had long forgotten: desperation, determination, hope, and the unshakable belief that no matter how powerful the enemy, they would never surrender. Another assault was ordered, this time heavier armor, more firepower, EMP drones to disable any electronic systems. The goal was simple: break through the jungle, reach the heart of the human defenses, and end this war. Troops moved out under the cover of artillery barges. Tanks rolled forward, turrets spinning, searching for targets. Fighters screamed overhead, dropping incendiary charges to burn away the forest canopy. The humans responded with fire and steel. Gatling guns mounted on mobile platforms swept entire squads from the field. Landmines detonated beneath armored vehicles, flipping them into the air like paper. Snipers picked off pilots mid-flight, sending fighter crafts crashing into the jungle. The fight was brutal, but the humans didn't falter. They held their ground. They bled. They died, but they never backed down. As night fell, the battlefield was littered with wreckage. The jungle burned in places, smoke curling into the sky like fingers reaching for the stars. Imperial forces withdrew, battered and broken, their numbers dwindling. Commanders sat in silence aboard the capital ship, watching the final report come in. Casualty count: 1,438 dead, over 200 missing. Enemy losses: unknown, but minimal. The message came next. Short, simple, terrifying. We are not afraid. No flags, no negotiations, no surrender, just defiance, and the realization that this war was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The jungle was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard. Smoke curled from the wreckage of tanks and dropships, their twisted frames half buried in mud and blood. The trees bore the scars of war: splintered trunks, scorched bark, branches torn apart by gunfire and explosions. Bodies lay where they fell, some imperial, others human, but all reduced to the same silence. Inside a hidden trench line deep within enemy territory, a group of soldiers worked quickly under cover of darkness. They moved with purpose, hands blackened with soot and grease, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. One man adjusted the barrel of a Gatling gun, while another fed a fresh belt of ammunition through the feed tray. Sparks flew as a third soldier welded additional plating onto an old truck chassis, reinforcing for its next run into the heart of the conflict. They weren't just surviving. They were evolving. Every battle taught them something new. Every captured piece of Imperial tech gave them an edge. Drones became tools for surveillance. Armor scraps were repurposed into makeshift shields. Even the weapons they scavenged were modified, improved, adapted, made deadlier. This wasn't just guerrilla warfare anymore. It was industrialized resistance. Back at the human command post, an underground bunker reinforced with salvaged steel beams and lined with stolen data terminals. Maps covered the walls. Red lines marked enemy movement patterns. Green dots indicated ambush positions. Yellow circles highlighted supply caches buried beneath the forest floor. A young officer stood at the center, his face lit by the glow of a holographic display. He tapped a section of the map, zooming in on a ridge that overlooked the main Imperial supply route. "We hit them here," he said, voice steady. "We take out the convoy before they reach the front lines." Another soldier nodded, adjusting a set of night vision goggles. "They'll send drones. We'll need countermeasures." "Already working on it," a technician replied, holding up a small device. "EMP pulse generator. It won't last long, but it'll blind their sensors for a few minutes." Minutes were all they needed. Outside, preparations continued. Men and women loaded crates of ammunition into wooden carts, dragging them through the mud toward fortified positions. Children ran messages between units, their small frames making them nearly invisible in the shadows. Every person had a role. Every hand contributed. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a people's war. As dawn broke, the Empire launched another assault. Dropships descended in tight formation, escorted by fighter craft. Heavy infantry followed, moving in disciplined ranks, scanning every inch of terrain. They expected resistance. What they didn't expect was precision. The first explosion came without warning. A landmine detonated beneath the lead tank, flipping it sideways. Then came the EMP burst, washing over the battlefield like a wave of static. Drones dropped from the sky. Fighters lost control mid-flight, spiraling into the jungle below. And then the Gatling guns opened fire. From elevated positions along the ridgeline, the humans unleashed hell. Dozens of rotating barrels spun in unison, tearing through armor and flesh alike. Soldiers screamed as bullets shredded their exosuits, sending bodies tumbling backward in sprays of red mist. The Imperial formation collapsed. Units scattered, tried to regroup, only to be cut down by sniper fire from concealed nests. Mortars rained down from unseen positions, each impact throwing dirt and shrapnel into the air. The humans had learned to use elevation, timing, and terrain to their advantage. This wasn't chaos. This was strategy. One squad managed to break through the initial barrage, pushing forward with heavy support. They reached what looked like an abandoned outpost, wooden barricades, sandbags, rusted vehicles. Then the ground beneath them exploded. Tunnels collapsed inward, swallowing entire groups of soldiers whole. From beneath the earth, human fighters emerged, armed with short-range weapons designed for close-quarters combat. Bayonets clashed against energy blades. Grenades detonated in tight spaces, turning tunnels into tombs. The survivors barely made it out. By the time the sun reached its peak, the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of another failed attack. Imperial forces retreated once more, leaving behind smoldering wreckage and broken bodies. Command watched the footage in stunned silence. Casualty count: 986 confirmed dead, another 312 missing. Enemy losses estimated less than 50. The message came soon after. You keep coming. We keep fighting. There was no arrogance in the words, no taunting, just fact. And the truth was undeniable. The humans were winning, not because they had better weapons, but because they fought smarter, harder, together. And the Galactic Empire, vast, powerful, seemingly unstoppable, was beginning to realize something terrifying. This wasn't just a rebellion. This was a revolution. And they were losing control. The jungle was silent again, but not the silence of defeat. This time, it was a silence before the final strike. Imperial forces had withdrawn to their main base, a sprawling fortress of steel and energy shields erected at the edge of the forest. Smoke still curled from the wreckage of their last assault, bodies littering the battlefield like forgotten relics. The air was thick with the scent of burning fuel and blood-soaked earth. Inside the command chamber aboard the capital ship, high-ranking officers sat in tense silence. Casualty reports continued to roll in, each more damning than the last. Entire battalions were gone, dozens of dropships destroyed, hundreds of soldiers missing or presumed dead. And yet, The enemy remained unseen. No formal declaration of war. No demand for negotiations. Just relentless resistance. Just humans, armed with old weapons, scavenged tech, and sheer willpower, fighting against an empire that spanned thousands of worlds. A general stood, his voice cold. We have two options, orbital bombardment or full retreat. Another officer scoffed. Retreat? We don't retreat. We are the empire. But we are losing, a strategist countered. Our forces cannot sustain these losses. Their tactics evolve faster than our intelligence can adapt. They anticipate every move. They dismantle every advantage we bring to the field. The room fell into uneasy silence. Then the screen flickered. A transmission, not from the enemy, from the battlefield. It showed grainy footage, night vision, shaky, taken from a soldier's helmet cam. A squad of Imperial troops moved cautiously through the jungle, scanning for movement. The trees loomed overhead, shadows stretching long in the dim light. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A low rumble built beneath them, growing louder, closer. Then came the sound, the unmistakable roar of spinning death. Gatling guns erupted from hidden emplacements along the ridgeline, tearing through the trees, shredding armor, ripping flesh from bone. Soldiers screamed as bullets tore through their ranks, cutting them down before they could even raise their weapons. One man managed to activate his suit's emergency beacon. His camera feed caught only chaos. Flashes of fire, bursts of red mist, the deafening roar of relentless gunfire. Then static, silence. The screen returned to the command room. No one spoke. Finally, the fleet admiral exhaled slowly. They're not just resisting. They're hunting us. A junior officer shook his head. This is impossible. We have superior firepower, superior technology. This shouldn't be happening. It is, the admiral said simply, because they fight differently. How? They don't rely on machines. They don't wait for orders. They don't need overwhelming force. They fight with instinct, with experience, with something we've lost. What's that? Someone asked. Adaptability. Outside, the jungle stretched dark and endless beyond the fortress walls. And within it, the humans waited. Their trenches were deeper now. Their fortifications reinforced with salvaged metal and concrete. They had learned from every battle, every mistake, every ambush. Their weapons were better maintained. Their strategies refined. Their morale unshaken. They weren't just surviving. They were preparing for the final push. At dawn, the attack came, not from the jungle, from the sky. Human-piloted stolen dropships streaked through the clouds, engines roaring. They carried no bombs. They carried men. Paratroopers leapt from open bays, descending upon the fortress like ghosts. They landed behind enemy lines, slipping past defenses, striking supply depots, sabotaging power generators. Inside the fortress, panic spread. Alarms blared. Troops scrambled. But it was too late. The gates burst open. Gatling guns roared at the forefront, mounted on repurposed armored vehicles, tearing through the outer perimeter. Explosives detonated along the walls, sending shockwaves through the compound. Snipers picked off officers from rooftops. Fighters engaged enemy drones midair, dogfights erupting above the battlefield. The fortress was under siege. Inside the capital ship, command watched in horror as live feeds cut out one by one. Communications failed. Drones lost contact. The fortress was being overrun. This isn't possible, a technician muttered. But it was. The humans had done what no other species had done before. They had breached the heart of the Empire's military presence on this world. And they weren't stopping. Back on the ground, a group of soldiers fought their way toward the central command tower. They moved fast, using smoke grenades and close-quarters combat to clear each floor. At the top, they found what they were looking for: live communications relays, direct links to the capital ship orbiting above. One of them stepped forward, grabbed a microphone, and spoke. His voice was calm, clear, unshaken. "This is Captain Rourke of the 3rd Resistance Battalion." He paused. "You came here thinking we were weak. We were nothing to you, a footnote in your conquests. A primitive world barely worth your attention. But we fought back. And now we own this battlefield. He looked into the camera feed. We don't want your ships. We don't want your weapons. We don't want your rule. We only want one thing. He leaned forward. Our planet. There was a moment of silence. Then he reached over and severed the signal. Below, the last pockets of resistance fell. Imperial troops surrendered in droves, realizing there was no escape. Some tried to flee toward the landing zones, only to be intercepted by human fighters waiting in the shadows. By nightfall, the fortress belonged to the humans. Command aboard the capital ship faced a decision: stay and fight, or leave. They chose the latter. As the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon, the Galactic Empire withdrew. Dropships lifted off, retreating into the sky. Fighters disengaged, pulling back to the safety of orbit. The once mighty armada turned away from the planet, leaving behind the wreckage of its failed invasion. On the surface, the humans stood among the ruins of war, victorious, exhausted, but alive. One soldier knelt beside a fallen comrade, placing a hand on his shoulder before rising again. Another wiped blood for his face, then smiled. Captain Rourke stood atop the remains of the fortress wall, watching the Empire vanish into the stars. Behind him, the jungle stirred. Life would return. Peace would come. But never again would they be underestimated. Never again would they be ignored. They were not primitives. They were warriors. And they had just proven that even the mightiest empire could fall, not to superior technology, but to the unbreakable spirit of humanity. The screen faded to black. A final message appeared. You thought we were weak. Now you know better. Humans, fighting back, harder than ever.